All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's professional development session, the final session of the NextGen Leaders Tools for Professional Success series, co-hosted by the SDSU Office of Career Development and the SDSU Alumni Association. This series is designed to equip emerging professionals with essential skills to thrive in their careers. Today's session, titled Owning Your Career Development, will focus on what each professional can do to be career ready. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. I would ask that all attendees please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation. We would hate to cause any distractions. I also imagine there will be questions during our session, so you are welcome to enter your questions in the chat feature found below. We will attempt to answer those questions throughout the presentation. We'll also have time at the end for Q&A. Today's session is extra special because we have two of our friends, Dr. Kevin Fullerton and Stephen Miedema from the Office of Career Development, that will be leading this workshop. Dr. Fullerton's formal education was in music, but for the past 15 years, his work is focused on experiential education, programming, and career development. He has taught at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Killian Community College, University of South Dakota, and the University of Kansas. His work has included classroom teaching, experiential education administration, and program administration. He maintains active memberships with the National Association of Colleges and Employers, National Career Development Association, and the Career Leadership Collective. Stephen Miedema is the Assistant Director of Career Education in the SDSU Office of Career Development. Stephen earned his bachelor's degree in biology and master's of education and counseling both here at SDSU. He has experience working in healthcare, restaurants, logistics, and many other odd jobs, but has spent the past 6 years in the Office of Career Development. In his free time, he enjoys being active outside, especially hiking and camping, and has backpacked an impressive 1,000 miles in the past 10 years. I'm pleased to welcome Kevin and Stephen as today's speakers. Gentlemen, Zoom is yours.
All right, thanks, Travis. Thanks so much for your work and collaboration with us in getting these programs going, or this program going. It's been a great year. Yeah, I just want to kind of go to the next slide here real quick. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. In addition to higher ed, I've worked in a variety of different settings: pizza, mortgage. I was a janitor at my old high school, so I'm not a stranger to work in the private sector too. So not afraid to get my hands dirty, but I'm really enjoying this time here, and looking forward to the content that we're going to share with you today. Stephen, you have some comments?
No, I'm excited to be presenting here with you today, Kevin. For anybody in attendance today, if you guys have questions, feel free to just throw them in the chat. I've got that up and I'll be kind of monitoring to that as I go through. That's something that is pretty useful because we want to engage with you. If you have questions, you're not supposed to be the experts, especially when we talk about things like resumes. So let us answer those questions for you. Along with that too, I was kind of thinking, why don't we start off, we were talking about some of our past jobs. How about everybody throw in the chat where they've worked at before?
Thanks.
Fun. I like to always see this. Got a good mix here. A couple people working in finance, construction. Did that for a while. I worked for my brother-in-law. He'd hire me to go in and clean up his job sites after he's all done with them. All right. Fun. Well, I always like to see where this is at. So, Kevin, I'll let you take it back over and we'll kick off this session.
All right, sounds good. All right, Nick. So just to recap, we have had a few different other webinars throughout the course of this academic year. We started out talking about communication in the professional world. Next moved on to the power of collaboration and teamwork, level up your team. And then we had a really great session in February that focused on really thinking about work skills and critical thinking and leadership and professionalism, some of the other soft skills that we talk about. And today we're going to wrap up this series talking about ways to really own your own career development, what that looks like, the career readiness competencies, and ways to think about that. And then, of course, offer up, our services in our office and make sure students and alumni understand that we can continue to work with you and support you as alumni, but especially as students when you're on campus. And all of these were recorded and they're available on the Alumni Association YouTube channel. So if you weren't able to attend the previous sessions, you can review those on your own time. All right, so career readiness, it might sound like sort of a vague topic and not really know what to think about that or say about that, but really there are some specific things to really discuss and think about. And our professional development series this year was really focused on these career readiness competencies. So NACE is the National Association for Colleges and Employers, and they have these different career readiness competencies that we all think about as being important to being work ready, career ready. Professionalism, communication, critical thinking, technology, leadership, teamwork, self and career development. We expect college graduates to be proficient at some level in terms of these different competencies. And there's a variety of ways to address these. And they're valuable in a sense that we all have different experiences that we get on campus. And if we can articulate those experiences to these competencies, then it really makes us really powerful as professionals and collaborators. Next slide. All right, so the key is really reflection and reflecting on your readiness. So think about how have your experiences helped you develop in these competencies. So did you have some sort of leadership role in marching band when you're on campus, or were you the head of a student organization or a club that helped you develop your leadership? If you're professional right now, you're not in school and you're working, what are you doing to really address these different types of aspects? Communication is key, right? So how are you trying to work on yourself as a communicator, both orally and verbally? One of the ways that we can really communicate these and exemplify that we are career ready is with the resume. So we think about the resume as kind of this key thing that we need to have developed, or we get a good resume in place and then we're ready for a job. And part of that's true. That's how we apply for jobs. But the resume really is it's not just a document of what you've done, but it's a demonstration of the skills that you have developed. And developing that resume is in and of itself a career development exercise. And so I want to turn it over to Stephen for a little bit of an exercise for you all to go through.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So to start, when we think about resumes, there's a lot of stuff that you'll hear about them. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of really, frankly, noise about resumes out there. What we try to focus on is a couple of these key specifics, typically the formatting. But before I begin really diving into those resumes, I like to first kind of take a step back and think about just general tips when we're thinking about that. As Kevin said there, a resume is not just what you've done, but really what we want it to do is we want to demonstrate who you are and how you do things using those past examples so that a recruiter would be able to see who you are and what you can really bring to that table. So the first thing I'm always going to do when I work with students, I always think, okay, what have you done? Right? I'll ask students, what are you proud of? What jobs have you done? What things do you like to do? What are you involved in on campus? Really what it's coming down to is how can I make myself stand out at a resume? If we're looking at it across the board, every single recruiter, they're looking for the exact same thing. They're looking for successful people to join their company. And so what I want to do is I want to demonstrate that success. And so we think, well, where have you had that success? And that's what's going to help you stand out. Students will often come to us and they'll ask, okay, well, I don't have any experience doing research, or I don't have any experience in a club organization. What am I supposed to put in these different sections? Well, at the end of the day, I tell students, put down what you have done because just using something to be that example is really the key. All right, so the next thing I'm going to tell everybody to do is I always want to start off with just brainstorming, right? Just get a big list of everything you've ever done. You'll hear stuff, and I'll even talk about it too, how we typically want to keep resumes to 1 page. But I want everybody to have kind of an ugly document, like a master resume, that lists every single thing you have ever done. You have no idea when something could potentially be valuable, right? Maybe that volunteering experience you did 10 years ago has a potentially relevant piece. And if you don't write that down and you don't track it someplace, it's easy to forget that. And so we really want to get together that good list. Then every time that we're thinking of like those different things, like those skills that we're using, the strengths, the accomplishments, that's really what we want, is we want accomplishments to demonstrate this. I mentioned earlier that we are looking for success. So when we start thinking about that, you're thinking about, okay, well, I did this volunteer position. And at that volunteer position, how do I demonstrate my success? Okay, well, maybe you helped run the Brookings Marathon. And the Brookings Marathon had, over like 300 people who participated in it. Well, there we have an actual quantifiable like data point that shows like the extent of what you might have done there. Or we think something like maybe you're in a sales position. Okay, well, if you say to me that you sold, $10,000 worth of product in a week, well, that might really stand out. And so we want to think, well, what are those accomplishments that can really demonstrate that skill that you're using? All right, then the next thing I'm going to say here is when I'm writing a resume, I want to work backwards. So this is my way I tell people this is how you cheat on a resume. Because everyone always asks, well, what do they want to see on the resume? Well, they tell you it's in the job description. When you're writing a resume, I want you to think of that job description as your rubric. Just like if you're writing an essay or a lab report, that job description is the rubric telling you exactly what you need to have on that resume to be able to get the interview. Often enough, like especially here at SDSU, we'll literally go through on our hiring committees and score each one of those things listed on that job description. And then the candidates with the highest score that have the best fit or the best match will be the ones who will come in for that interview. And so what I want you guys to always do is start with looking at what those employers want in that job description. Because you'll often see things, right? I always pick on communication skills. Well, one employer, they might call it communication skills. Another employer might call that interpersonal skills, or they might call it customer service skills. And really what they're all looking for there is kind of the same thing. And so what I want you to do is use their language, use their skills that they list. The other thing I always say is look at the verbs that they're using on that job description and use those when you're writing your documents. All right, then we start thinking about, well, how do we catch an attention? There's a stat out there. It's something like the average recruiter will look at a resume for less than 30 seconds before they make their decision whether they want to even consider reading the rest of the resume or looking into that candidate further. So what we want to do is we want to position our strongest selling points right up there on the top of that page. For most students, that's going to be your degree. Really, for most people, we typically recommend putting your degree first, but it might be a really relevant job experience. It might be a really relevant internship that you had. And then at the bottom of that resume is where we might put that less relevant stuff. When I think of myself back when I was in college, well, I was doing an internship in a research lab, and that was a lot more relevant at that time. But I also had a part-time job working at Cubbies. Well, is anybody get too excited that I could be a server at Cubbies? Well, maybe with the communication skills, but at that time, the experience working in that research lab was way more important. So I want to highlight that stuff towards the top of that page. All right, and then this is just something I always tell students to do this. And really, if you're even starting to consider maybe a career switch or looking at future jobs, or if you're looking at moving up, getting a promotion or moving into more of a managerial role, start looking at those jobs right now. Start looking to see what's out there and use those job applications, those job postings as a checklist for what you need to get done or what you need to accomplish so that you can move into that next role. And this is something that typically is going to take a few years in advance, just so you can start preparing. For example, if you aren't getting management experience in your current job, but you know that they're going to want management experience to be able to move up in your company, well, maybe that's when you look at a volunteering opportunity where you could go out and get that management experience instead. So it's starting to kind of just be a little bit proactive and have some forethought with this. All right, so going through the general tips, now we go on to the different parts of a resume. Again, I said it in that last slide. Really what it comes down to is it's what have you done? What have you demonstrated that's been successful for you? Because that's what we want to put on that resume. I remember when I was applying to jobs as an undergrad student, one of the coolest things that I did in my undergrad career was I helped set a world record. SDSU, we set a world record for the world's largest pillow fight at a football game. Well, that was a really cool thing. I was a part of getting our name into the Guinness Book of World Records. Is anyone going to get too excited about, the fact that I was doing some logistics, like helping run an event like that? Maybe. I mean, realistically, all I did was I was the person who escorted a dignitary. But what it is it's something that demonstrated I was a part of something that's successful. And so that's kind of where we're going to start to think about what we put in. At the end of the day, though, there's generally three main components of what we're going to have on a resume. The first one is your contact information. This is the most important thing to have on a resume. So I always need your preferred name. So if you shorten your name or something, so like my name is Steven, but if I went by Steve, I would put Steve on all of my documents. It's part about just being consistent and makes it easier for people to feel like they get to know you too. From there, we need your email. I'm going to always say to use a professional email. SDSU students, I always say to use your Jack's email. Even alumni, it's all right if you use your Jack's email. Typically, I want you to do like a first name, last name, kind of simple like Gmail or something as you go forward. Your phone number, we want them to ideally just pick up the phone and call you, so always put that down. And then finally, the last thing is it comes to the address. And I get a lot of questions on this. Should you put your street address on that application or not? Typically, I'm going to say no. Realistically, a recruiter never needs to know your specific street address until you're hired at that company and filling out tax documents. So if you're going to put your address on there, what I want you to put on there is your city, your state, and your zip code. And when we're doing that, we're putting in where you'll be traveling from for that interview. So if you're in Brookings, we'd put Brookings. Now, maybe you're applying to jobs back home and you're there living over the summer, but you're going to come back as a student. Well, we'd put back home or wherever you're at, where you're going to be traveling for. Usually this is HR just being able to track and be able to plan ahead when they're doing the interview process. All right, so that's the first part. The second part then is education. We always need that on there. So when we do that education section, we're always going to need SDSU or what other university you might have gotten a degree from. And then we need the location of that university. So South Dakota State University, Brookings, SD. Maybe it's a nursing degree and you're at the Sioux Falls campus. Well, then you put Sioux Falls in there. Then we always need the degree. So like a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, maybe it's a master's, maybe it's a PhD, whatever that is. And then typically we're going to put the major in there right away afterwards. I have seen with alumni several years out of school, sometimes the major doesn't start to matter all that much. And so they might drop off the major. Typically, I'm going to leave it on there anyway, just to include that. And then we're going to put in either your graduation date or your expected graduation date if you have not graduated yet. That's usually all the employer is going to care about. They're not going to get too caught up in when you started school versus when you graduated. At the end of the day, put when you graduated or when you're going to graduate, because that's really what they want to know is, do you have that degree? Or when are you going to graduate so they can hire you full time? Other things some people will include in there, some people will include like minors if they're relevant. I always say include them if they're relevant. I have a minor in philosophy. I don't necessarily include that on any of my jobs anymore. There's something I did for fun in undergrad, but it's not going to necessarily get me the job. And I probably want to use that space more efficiently on my resume now. The other question I'll get is some people will include GPA. For students, I'm always going to encourage them to include their GPA if they have above a 3.0. Once people get their first full-time job after graduation, I typically am going to say don't include your GPA unless you're applying to grad school. And then the final part of what you need to include on your resume. Everything else is optional. This is what you need to include, which is your experience. Typically, this is going to be your work experience, or it's your relevant experience, maybe relevant class projects. Sometimes even hobbies can be relevant too. So with that, we always need a position title. It's usually going to be the first thing I'm going to put on there. Then we need the company or organization name, and then we need the city and state of where that company is located. If you're working remote, some people will put like a little like parentheses and remote in there, but realistically put where that main office is down, and that's going to be good enough. And then we need the dates of employment for that. And I always want that in month and year to month and year. Unless you're currently in that job, then it could be through present or through current. Along with that, do you have something?
Sorry. Yeah, there's a question in the chat that popped up.
Oh, yeah.
Just about including a driver's license number on the resume. Somebody applied for a state job. And I was just kind of curious if that's a common thing or not.
Yeah. So if we're thinking about some of those in applicant tracking systems, they might expect that, or they might want that included. If something that like maybe the job it needs you to have a driver's license, well, then they might ask for that. It's not super common though that people will ask for those specific things, and always, figure out what is required and what's not required when it goes through that process. I would always also recommend if anybody ever has questions during the hiring process, contact that company's human resources. That's really going to be one of the best ways to you to get to talk to somebody. And not only is it like helpful to figure out your question and answer, but also you're doing some networking, and all of a sudden you're a real human being when you call them and ask questions versus just another spammed in application that they're reviewing. So it can really help out doing that extra legwork. Does that answer your question there? Yeah, gaps of employment. So that's a good one to bring up there, Becky. So gaps of employment, from what I've seen when I've sat on hiring committees, is the only time that people are concerned about them is when they're not addressed. It's not uncommon for somebody to take a gap of employment. In fact, I would really encourage you guys, if you're ever able to, take a gap year. Just take a break from your career, go and live, have a great adventure. If you have to take care of family, if you decide to be a stay-at-home parent, whatever it is, that's definitely fine. What I've seen is when people start to get concerned is when you don't address them, right? Is when you don't explain them or don't say what happened during that time. And so that's where they will start to get into that kind of a concern. And, if you are doing something as simple as, taking care of a child or a sick family member, that's completely fine. Nobody's going to look down on it. I think that's a normal thing. All right. Any other questions on different things that could be included on a resume? From here, what I'm going to go into is just kind of my general formatting pieces of what I always say, like, generally we're going to follow. Everything else gets to be kind of extra. All right. Well, thank you. Keep throwing questions in the chat. Kevin, interrupt me anytime when you see one of those come in.
Yep.
All right. So we're getting into it. When I'm thinking of resume writing, I'm going to start with the formatting. These are those general guidelines, make it clean, make it easy to read. And then from there, we'll get into more of the art of it, which is how we write those bullet points. So I always say, start off easy to read, black font, typically 10 to 12 point size. Adjust this accordingly. If you have a lot more of experience, you can drop it down to 10-point font. You can probably fit an extra job description or something on there. Easy to read font though. I don't typically encourage students to have colored ink on a resume. Some people will see that as unprofessional. The other side of it is we do have some recruiters, like I know a recruiter at Sanford, for example, who is colorblind. And for him, if he ever gets blue ink on a resume, it comes across as a really light shade of gray, and he struggles to be able to read that. And so typically I'm going to always say black and white. I know it sounds boring, but sometimes we got to look a little boring, and then we'll catch their attention with how we write. Then we have the format. In the format, we're always going to put things in reverse chronological order. Typically, people want to see timelines. They want to see your career progression. Also, usually, our most recent jobs are usually the jobs that we're getting more responsibility in as we continue to develop in our career. So, for example, in let's say an education section, if you get a PhD, well, that would come at the top. And then below that, we would include maybe that bachelor's degree. So always starting with your most recent and then work your way backwards to give that nice timeline. If you do have maybe like a gap, or if you have, maybe a part-time job that's not super relevant, but you want to highlight an internship, that's where I'll usually have something like 2 different sections to be able to separate those so we can still have your most important information at that top of the resume. All right, the next thing is the content of the resume. So it gets a little bit away from the formatting here, but this is something that's super important. We see when students aren't getting jobs, when they're not getting, I would say, interviews for the job, the number one thing that's catching them is that they're not customizing their content in those jobs that they're applying to. You need to tailor your resume. Like I was saying earlier, work backwards. Start with that job description and identify what you need to include. From there, you can then start to tailor your resume, use their keywords so that you are making sure you're getting through that process. And this is only continuing to increase as more companies use applicant tracking systems that use an automated system to review resumes before a person will ever look at it. The next thing I'm going to say is for your layout, I always want to see bullet points. I do not like reading paragraphs on a resume. Those recruiters, they want to get to the information quick and fast. Always have really quick, easy to read bullet points on there. And then do things to help draw the reader's eye to certain places. Maybe bold all of your section headings. Maybe italicize all of your company names. Maybe you're going to write certain skills in all caps when you're in those job descriptions. The biggest thing I'm going to say with this is remember to do it all to draw the reader's eye, but do it sparingly, because if we get too much going on that resume, it's a distraction. And we want to keep these as simple as possible. Next, we're going to say the length of the resume. Typically, I'm almost always going to tell people 1 page. If you're applying to grad school or if you're in research or in academia, then we can do a CV and we can do multiple pages. When it comes to CVs, I'm going to always say no more than 5 pages. But in the meantime, if you are just going for that resume, typically 1 page is enough. If you are at the point of your career where you're starting to apply for like C-suite level jobs or like the higher up managerial type jobs, then sometimes they're going to be all right with 2 pages. When in doubt, reach out to the company and ask. All right. If you do print off your resume, which you should if you're going in for an interview at least, always use good paper. I am a big fan of recycled paper whenever possible, but this is one of those times where having that extra little bit of professionalism, it used to be a thing. They used to tell people you had to have resume quality paper, and they would tell students to go out and buy whole new pieces of paper and everything. Really, at the end of the day, just make sure you're using like nicer paper. Talking about professionalism, proofread. Proofread, proofread, proofread. I can't emphasize that one enough. Every year, I'll sit at career fairs and I'll watch recruiters at the end of the day stand over a trash can and throw away any resume with a typo. I watched a recruiter a couple years ago. She had 60 resumes in her hand. I watched her throw 30 of them away because she kept finding small typos on them. I asked her about it, and she said, from her opinion, if someone wasn't willing to put through the effort to make sure it was all good in the application, how can they trust that they're going to put in the effort to make sure everything's organized and successful at that company? So absolutely proofread, and have somebody else proofread too for you. It's really easy when we're spending a lot of time writing these documents to take too much time and we start to flip words in our brain or we miss those little typos. And so have someone else double check it. All alumni can use our office for free. Take advantage of us, right? We're here 12 months out of the year. There's 4 of us available, if not more, to be able to review resumes. If you want to get it double checked, just shoot us an email. It's careers@sdstate.edu, and we would be happy to work with you. All right. The last, or almost the last bit, is the spacing. Margins. If you're struggling to fit everything on 1 page, Microsoft Word usually is going to auto set everything to like 1.5 inches or 1 inch margins. Feel free to drop those down. Feel free to drop those margins down to like that narrow setting or that 1/2 inch margin. You're going to get a lot more content onto that 1 page of that resume and still keep it nice, organized, and easy to read. Conversely, If you are a student and you don't have much work experience yet, well, raise those margins up a little bit to keep that content all centered right in the middle of that page. Really, I just don't want any big like white spaces or big gaps around any of the edges of the resume. All right, and then the last thing I'm going to say about formatting for resumes is avoid templates. If you guys are looking for a template, if you want a sample resume, if you want any of that, reach out to us. Let us know. We have a massive library when it comes to sample documents. Avoid using those online resume generators though. Avoid like the ones that will be like pay $5 to download a PDF of your resume. Please, please, please do not use those. You get our services for free. Reach out to us. We will help you. We have resources. Those online resume generators, most of them end up being more of a pain, or even just like the Microsoft Word automated templates that they have, they lock the formatting on those. And they do that so that they stay looking pretty. What that means is when you start to adjust it for your specific experiences, you end up with a headache trying to figure that out. So please, please, please just reach out to us. Don't worry about using online templates. All right, before I move on from the format piece, does anybody have questions on any of that format?
You haven't mentioned military experience in the resume. I assume that should be a key part of it too.
Yeah,
Perhaps
yeah. Usually, if people have prior military experience and they're applying for civilian jobs, I'm going to lump that in right with their regular work experience in there. That way, we don't have to worry about having too many extra sections. Now, if somebody is looking for something like with the federal government, they're maybe on USA Jobs or they're applying for maybe a civilian contractor type thing, then we might separate that military experience out from that regular work experience. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Rich. All right. So the next part of the resume, we got through the formatting. Here's just a couple quick things when I'm talking about the appearance of the resume. Most of the stuff is pretty standard. Really, when we're thinking appearance, I want to think consistency. Consistency is the key. Don't make them think too much when they're looking at your resume. Keep it nice, easy, clean, easy to read. Please do not include artwork, photographs, anything like that's too, I would say, like cutesy on that resume. We don't want to see that. Most companies in the US, actually, it's an HR violation for them to accept a resume that has a photograph on it. Pretty much that's a common thing in all of North America. Do not include photographs on your resumes. The only places I've seen it where it's like an expected standard is in Southeast Asia. We will get some students, so maybe some of our graphic design majors, some other students there in some of the more creative fields that will want to put logos or artwork on that. If you are in a field where having your own branding, having your own logo is important, have a little bit on there if you feel like you need to. But even typically in those more creative fields, they want a resume to be a lot more strategic and a lot more simple and leave all of that creativity for your digital portfolio. All right. So I think we've all done this already, but I want you all in your heads, just think about one of the past jobs you've had. I'm going to go through a little bit of an exercise here. All right, so I'm going to think of my past job when I was bartending at Cubby's. All right. Well, when we're starting to think about these jobs, especially if we're thinking about jobs like something like a bartending job where it's less relevant, I want you to start to think about, well, how can we translate that to make it more relevant or make it more important? And so when we're thinking about each of those jobs, I want you to think, what did you do in that position? Right? So for me, maybe I was just handling customer transactions. Maybe I was taking orders. Maybe I was cleaning the floors at the end of the night, just sweeping. Well, is a recruiter going to care that I knew how to sweep the floors? Probably not, right? But what they're going to start to care about is things like maybe attention to detail. Maybe they're going to care about what strengths I used when I was doing that job. Maybe they're going to care about what I focused on. And so when we think about that, we think, what did you do in that position? And then we want to elaborate. So we'll say, well, why was that important? Okay, well, for me, sweeping the floors, that's going to make it a clean and welcoming environment so that people want to come in and feel comfortable eating food in that restaurant. All right, what was your impact within that company? Well, there, I was making sure that that restaurant was organized. I was making sure people felt welcomed, and that's going to increase that revenue. How did I perform those duties? Well, with sweeping, maybe I want to say that I used really that attention to detail. Maybe I'm going to say that I did it efficiently so that I could get back and do the other important parts of my job. And then we think, what skills did you use or develop? Well, maybe on the sweeping part, I didn't really develop all that much for skills, but that customer service ability might be really important, especially if I was in a service facing position or working with really anyone, whether that's external or internal stakeholders. So it's a way to kind of just start to brainstorm about this. It's really a way of thinking about it of like, how do I make this relevant for that job that I'm applying to? All right. So the last bit here that I'm going to cover is I'm going to cover what we call the accomplishment statement. I said earlier, I don't like to see paragraphs in resumes. So what we really want to look at here is, well, what can we have in there to write quick and easy to read bullet points? So I want you always doing is I always want you starting every resume bullet point off with an action verb. And I want you to be very specific with that action verb too. I hate the word assisted. I see it all the time on resumes. Students go through it, especially with internships. They'll say, oh, I assisted on this project. I want you to be specific with that verb to really take ownership of that project. Then we always want to give that example of what you're doing. And then I say here that it equals results. The name of this is called the accomplishment statement, right? And I said earlier, those accomplishments, they demonstrate the success that we had in those positions. Well, that's what we really want to focus on, is what is it that can back up how good of a job you did or to what extent you did that job. So if I think here, I think rang up purchases. All right, something simple. We've probably all done that before in some sort of a part-time job, especially anything like retail. All right, well, if we flip that into this, well, managing the transactions, and then I start to think of like how I did it, if I'm thinking back on translating those duties with that previous slide. Well, here we're saying translating it with positivity. You know, maybe that's something that I'm going to focus on, whereas somebody else, they might focus on doing it with efficiency, or maybe they're going to focus on being the most knowledgeable rep. And then here, I'm giving an example of a result. So maybe you won a top sales associate award. So that's something that we can include in there. If you ever get an award for work, that needs to be in that job description or in your experience description. If you ever get employee of the month, if you ever get a promotion, use that stuff, have that in there. The other side of it too is with this one, well, if we're talking about ringing up purchases, we're talking about making that company money. And so whenever possible, I like to throw in stats. And so here we very easily could just put in, hey, ring up or manage numerous financial transactions with positivity, resulting in an average daily sales of $10,000. Well, when we do that, well, that company, they're seeing that dollar sign. And that's what they want to bring you in for, is to be able to show those results. All right. So this piece, it does start to get into more of the art of writing resumes. If anybody is interested, we have tons of content. Check out our website. We have tons and tons of resources on there. You can really dive way more in depth than what I have time to do this today. And I think with that, I'm going to move on. I'm going to let Kevin take over here.
All right, thanks, Stephen. It's really nice to have a detailed look at resume construction, what it is, how to do it, things of that nature. So yeah, you might be thinking, okay, well, all right, I know how to put a resume together now, but maybe you're in this position where you're just like, okay, now what? Then what? What am I supposed to do? And I want to just take some time to showcase the different ways that our office can support you in your job search, and just trying to obtain information and be as strategic as you can. So this last year, we were able to launch what we call a virtual career center, and we are really grateful for it because it's a way that we can really engage with you online. But I also want you to know where we are physically. So you can find us in the student union. We're in the student student engagement office suite off Main Street of the Student Union building. And yeah, so physically, that's where we're at. And with our virtual career center, it's our new website. There's tons of information that is open source information there. So we have information organized by career paths. So you can look at specific career paths that you're interested in, see what jobs are available within those career paths. We have blog content that's related to those career paths and different resources. So there really is a lot of information that you can obtain just from our website. Most notably, probably events that are on the page as well. But also the top buttons that allows you to engage really quickly with our online modules, such as Handshake, which is our job board, the way you can make appointments with us. Focus to Career, which is a really good assessment tool for students that are specifically looking, trying to decide what to major in, what kinds of careers they might be interested in. And then our virtual resume review, which is another online module that we have, where you can get some automated and curated feedback on your resume 24/7. So a lot of really great resources at your fingertips from our website. Right. And so now I want to showcase the capacity of our team too. We have a fully staffed office at the moment, and we have a really great career education team. We have Stephen Miedema, who's with us today, Aaron Peterson, Megan Kelly, Brittany Domino. I think they're all on this webinar right now, attending as attendees, but all very accomplished individually, professionally, but together as a team, it's a really great powerhouse, and they can do a lot in terms of guiding you in terms your career path, whatever questions you might have in terms of choosing a major, tailoring your job application materials. Maybe you're getting ready for grad school. You want to figure out how to write a personal statement for those grad school applications. We help with interview prep, mock interviews. So if you want to work out the nerves before a big interview, you can come to our office and we can help you with that. So lots of different ways that we can help you in terms of your job prep and job search and career development that way. Yeah, so what that looks like is individual appointments. You can make individual appointments with the career ed team for a resume review, interview prep. Yeah, we have lots of capacity throughout the days and weeks.
I want to throw in here quick. If you are an alumni who wants to use our services are free for all alumni. Yep. I have worked with alumni who have graduated in early 80s. I've worked with recent alumni. I've helped alumni apply for jobs as college level deans. And so we are here for you every step along the way. Feel free to reach out whenever possible. The best way for alumni to connect with us is to shoot us an email. It's careers@sdstate.edu.
Thanks. All right. So another important aspect with our office is the employer engagement side. So Becky Pistolka and Jordan Feist are our employer engagement team. They help with all the logistics for career fairs. So if you're a recruiter and you're trying to connect with us, these are the two folks that are probably the best to contact. And they do a lot of great work in terms of supporting employers and recruiters, bringing them to campus for interview days or tabling at the union, all sorts of ways that they help get people connected to students and faculty and staff. And then we have Pam McBride, who's our program assistant in our office, and she really helps us all stay organized and does a lot of great support work for all of us. So yeah, a couple of additional resources here. So with our website, you can subscribe to a monthly newsletter. You can tailor that information so you can follow us for more content, and you can follow specific career paths, different topics. So I encourage you to check that out. And then we also launched this year a podcast called Career Connections. You can listen to that podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon as well. And then you can get to the landing page for the host page for our podcast through our website as well. Okay, so to kind of wrap up our session, I want to just really hone in on the idea of professionalism, one of those career readiness competencies, and talk specifically about it. Because I think for me, it is one of those core kind of competencies. If you really think in depth about that, then you will start addressing communication, critical thinking skills, and the other competencies that are in the mix. And there's an author that I follow a lot, and I'm sure my staff is tired of hearing me talk about Seth Godin. But he's been really influential for me, and I subscribe to his daily blog post, and I really like this post about professionalism, where he's talking about just the need to show up and how fundamental that is to be a professional. So the idea of authenticity, we talk about that a lot, but so the way he phrases it, authenticity is for amateurs. We want the surgeon, the broadcaster, or the musician to show up fully as the best version of themselves. We know you might be tired from an overnight shift and authentically feel like phoning it in, but hey, this is the only aorta I've got, and I prefer if you were the consistent world-class surgeon you're capable of being. Authenticity is for friendships, and professionals simply show up, especially when they don't feel like it. I think that's a kind of an important thing to think about. So when I think about professionalism, I like to divide it up into these three different areas: vision, tactics, and strategy. And the tactics, I think we talk about that a lot, which is showing up on time, dressing appropriately, and doing some of those really observable things that we expect professionals to do. But I encourage you all to think more about the vision and the strategy as well. What kind of professional do you want to be? How do you want to get there? Do you want to be a world-class data analyst for a financial firm? Okay, great. What is it going to take for you to get there? What kind of degrees do you need? Certifications? This is where networking might come into play. When you're thinking about networking, who do you need to know in order to really learn what it takes to be a part of that industry? If you have military experience, for example, how are you going to apply that experience to the professional world? Where do you want to go from there? So I think it's a really important framework, and I like this framework because it allows us to sort of separate some of these ideas and focus on them as little chunks in terms of the bigger picture. And just an example, and so thinking about that, just some action items I want you to really think about on the next slide. Write this down. Ask probing questions. It is always important to ask questions. Students, if you're getting ready to graduate, I want you to just really internalize and understand you have a lot to offer this world. Your degree has value, but it is your responsibility to communicate your value. We can't really assume what you've done on campus. We know Jackrabbits are really strong students and strong alumni, but what is it specifically that allows you to be a professional? Networking, it is crucial. No, really, it is. And I want you to commit to yourself and start now. So my training as a musician is as a musician, and I think it's really important to translate your skills and start doing that now, especially if you're early in your professional career. A lot of people don't really think a whole lot about the skills that musicians have other than the actual ability to play music on stage, carry a tune. But what did I learn as a musician that translates to almost any other professional environment? I learned the ability to collaborate. I learned the ability to see the bigger picture. I have patience with nuance and ambiguity, self-awareness, self-discipline, project management, performance assessment, classroom management once I started teaching music. All of those skills can translate into a lot of different disciplines. And so whatever it is you're working on right now, I really want you to spend some time, especially with that triangle of professionalism and thinking about your strategy and vision. What are you working on and what are you experiencing and how is that going to influence you as a professional? With that, I will turn it over to questions to anybody else. We're right at 12:50, but we can take some questions here if anybody has any questions or comments.
Well, Kevin, I'm happy to kick things off. As far as questions, I want to first start by just thanking both of you for sharing all the information that you have today. I find it incredibly beneficial, and I'm hoping that those that are in attendance and those that watch the recording find that as well. You were talking about just now professionalism and touching on some of those aspects and key components of professionalism. With that in mind, what's one of the most common career planning mistakes that you see students or alumni making, and how can they avoid making those mistakes?
Sure. From my perspective, and Stephen, feel free to offer up your ideas too, but from my perspective, I feel like it's underestimating the amount of time that is needed to make a plan. This time of year, I like to joke that we have some late onset urgency from students that are graduating in May. Have been in our office this spring trying to figure out what they want to do, and I get it. It's easy to have that happen where time does move quicker, I think, than people want, but so this planning takes longer. And so just that idea of really understanding, okay, this degree, what are my options when I graduate? Start thinking about that as a sophomore, or maybe even a freshman.
Yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to. What I was going to say immediately was it's not planning, right? That's the number one mistake. People, like Kevin was saying, they don't appreciate how long it takes for you to prepare. Okay, so say you're planning, you're going to buy a house. Well, you're going to spend months talking with a banker, talking with realtors, going through all of that. And then all of a sudden, it's not just you're buying a house, you're going through all those steps. Well, it's the same thing when we're looking at a career, right? You need to start planning ahead. There's actually some data we're starting to come out from some of like the researchers in our field that are saying you should be planning career plans like 3 years in advance if you're starting to make a career switch. So even if you are pretty comfortable in your job, it's never a bad idea to be looking at what's coming next, whether that's a promotion, whether that's a new company, whether that's retirement even. Every time we have that career change, let's have a plan going into that. Because what happens most often is if you don't have a plan, that's when you get blindsided. And that's where we really start to struggle.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Saw a question in the chat that came up from Neha. I find it hard to come up with quantifiable metrics to put on a resume. Is it okay to include assumptions or any other tips? I would say try to avoid assuming as much as you can, but you're right though. In those bullet points, it can be really hard to come up with a quantifiable sort of metric on something. But I think the best thing to do would be engage with folks that were a part of that experience with you that you're trying to cite. Maybe it's your boss, and you can ask, hey, when I was working here, what kind of impact do you feel like I've had with this company? Or maybe you started a new program, or maybe you increased membership of the student club that you were a part of, or it might be a whole variety of kinds of things. But those kinds of conversations are what the career ed team in our office are for. So if you want to have a focused conversation about it, we could really get into the weeds with it if you want to come in and make an appointment. Travis asking about the importance of having a resume and a LinkedIn profile. I really like that question because I think LinkedIn can be really useful. But it's just like, it's one of those things like if you use it, it's useful. If you have like a stagnant, just half profile on LinkedIn, it is really that meaningful. But I think it's important if you get on there there are really great ways to connect and engage with folks. I've really broadened my professional community just through LinkedIn. So it's not a requirement, but I think it can be really useful.
I think LinkedIn, it's especially useful 5 years down the road, right? Like it's not going to necessarily for like my current students, it's not going to be the make or break thing. Where it's useful is 5 years from now, you're going to forget where all your classmates went for their first job. You're going to forget 10 years from now who's working at what company. And where it really comes in handy is, if you're tracking all those, go out and add everybody, add all your friends, add all your professors, add everybody, all your colleagues right now, because in a few years from now, you might be applying. You might say, hey, I really want to get a job at Daktronics. Who do I know at Daktronics? Then going on to LinkedIn and just looking that up. Well, then you remember, oh, hey, my old classmates there. I should reach out to them, maybe do some of that connection. and see what he's feeling like about that company. That's where LinkedIn really does start to make the difference. It's just, it used to be the thing was your Rolodex, right? I mean, essentially it's your Rolodex now.
Becky had a good question on whether we know if recruiters are checking social media accounts prior to interviewing an applicant. Most companies don't have any official sort of statement about that, but we know they are. Employers, we've heard it anecdotally, just in one-on-one conversations with recruiters, and in other contexts, I've heard that they are. Whether it's good, bad, right, or wrong, they are.
Social media can definitely be a positive. I've had friends who, one of my friends, he used to work for NASA, and he's literally gotten job interviews because he was just talking to somebody on Twitter about one of the rocket launches that happened a few years ago. Because they ended up having a really great conversation. The guy said, "Hey, I have this job opening. Are you interested?" And so it can be really positive. I think we all, I don't need to give examples how social media can be negative though. So be careful. When in doubt, sanitize or go private when you're in a job search.
Gentlemen, we'll wrap things up with one final question. What's one action that you'd recommend everyone watching this session right now take this week to move their career forward?
I would say wherever you are in your career, if you're satisfied, if you're looking for a change, if you're a student that's looking at graduating and you're trying to find that first professional job, give yourself the gift of self-reflection. Like really focus. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's daily, whatever sustainable practice you can come up with, half hour at a time, asking yourself, okay, what's going really well that I want to maintain? What would I like to change? How can I change that? Do I know anybody that can help me change that? And with the things that I know I'm doing well, how can I help? Who can I help with those gifts? And because I think that for me, that's the spirit of networking is just trying to figure out how and who I can connect with and contribute to.
I was going to say reflection too. Reflect, find balance, right? That's kind of what I was going to say. So along the lines of what Kevin just said there. So instead, what I'm going to tell you guys, everybody should look at their resume this week. Look at your resume. Even if you're not planning on applying to a job, if you're not looking at anything in the future, everybody go out, dust off your resume, make some quick edits, because what happens is people get blindsided all the time by job searches. They only look at their resume when it's time to apply for that job, but it doesn't fail. Like, you're going to find that job you really want to apply to a day before that application is due. And so do yourself a favor, make that edit right now, help yourself out. It'll work out in the long run.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining today's session, part of the NextGen Leaders Tools for Professional Success series. Again, big thank you to Kevin and Stephen for sharing their insights and practical tips on developing essential skills for the workplace. As Kevin mentioned, all the recordings from our NextGen Leaders Professional Development series can be found on the SDSU Alumni Association YouTube channel. If you're watching live, I just added a link to for the channel in our chat, so go ahead and check that out. If you're watching the recording, you can find the alumni channel by searching at SDSU Alumni Association 5424. Again, at SDSU Alumni Association 5424. All of these things that have been discussed, not only today, but in our previous recordings, are just some wonderful skills that will not only help you enhance your professional success, but also help build stronger, more effective teams. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a great day. Thanks.